Yeah, we're coming back to the immigrant topic, not expats, immigrants. More than 2,250 British citizens were ordered to leave EU member states between the end of the Brexit transition period and September last year. That's according to figures from the Union Statistical Office. I talked about this before. And in one of my recent videos, I talked about the numbers all over the EU and about Spain. But another important topic for British emigrants was Sweden. And today I want to go a bit deeper into that topic. As of March 2023, the Swedish Migration Agency has issued leave orders to 1,378 British citizens since Brexit. Of these, 1,220 have left Sweden, while 158 are still in the country and are required to leave by a certain date. The vast majority of British citizens who had been given leave orders have done so because they failed to apply for post-Brexit resident status. However, a small number of British citizens have also been given leave orders for other reasons, such as having criminal convictions or failing to register with the Swedish authorities. The Swedish Migration Agency has said that it is committed to ensuring that all British citizens who are legally entitled to stay in Sweden are able to do so. However, the agency has also said that it is important to enforce the law and that those who are not legally entitled to stay in Sweden will be required to leave. And there are a few reasons why British citizens have been given leave orders by Sweden after Brexit. First of all, there's the failure to apply for post-Brexit resident status. Under the withdrawal agreement between the UK and the EU, British citizens who were living in Sweden legally before December 31st in 2020 were given the right to stay in Sweden if they applied for post-Brexit resident status by December 31st in 2021. However, some British citizens failed to apply for status by the deadline, and these people are now considered to be illegal immigrants and have been given leave orders to leave Sweden. And then there are criminal convictions. British citizens who have been convicted of a crime in Sweden may also be given leave orders to leave the country. This is because Sweden has a policy of deporting foreign nationals who have been convicted of serious crimes. But there are also other reasons. In some cases, British citizens have been given leave orders for other reasons, such as failing to register with the Swedish authorities or not having a valid visa. It's important to note that not all British citizens who live in Sweden have been given leave orders. The vast majority of British citizens who were living in Sweden before Brexit have been able to stay in the country, but there's still quite a number. There are a small number of British citizens who have been affected by the new rules because they didn't comply to something. And British citizens who were living in Sweden legally before December 31st in 2020, as I said, had the right to stay in Sweden after Brexit if they applied for post-Brexit resident status within a year. And to do this, they had to submit an application to the Swedish Migration Agency and provide evidence that they met the requirements. And the requirements for post-Brexit resident status for British citizens vary depending on their individual circumstances. But there are still some major requirements I want to talk about. Having been living in Sweden for at least 5 years before December 31st in 2020 was one of them. Or having a job offer in Sweden, being a student in Sweden, being married to or in a registered partnership with a Swedish citizen, or having close family members in Sweden. If a British citizen met the requirements for post-Brexit resident status, they were granted a residence permit for 5 years. After 5 years, they could apply for a permanent residence permit. British citizens who failed to apply for post-Brexit resident status by the deadline were no longer legally entitled to stay in Sweden, though. They were given those leave orders to leave the country by a certain date. And if they did not leave Sweden by the deadline, they could even be deported. However, there are some exceptions to this rule. For example, British citizens who have a serious illness or who are married to a Swedish citizen may be able to stay in Sweden even if they did not apply for post-Brexit resident status. But to be eligible, they of course had to comply with the Swedish residency rule for all EU citizens before Brexit. Because as an EU citizen, you have the right to live, work, and study in Sweden without a residence permit. However, there are a few things you need to do to make sure you are in compliance with Swedish law. You have to register with the Swedish Migration Agency. Within 3 months of your arrival in Sweden, you must register with the Swedish Migration Agency. But you can do this online or at a local migration agency office, so it's not rocket science. And you have to get a Swedish personal identity number, a personnummer. A personnummer is a unique personal identification number, a number that is required for most official purposes in Sweden. And you can apply for a personnummer at the Swedish tax agency. And you needed to get a Swedish bank account, because you need a Swedish bank account to receive your salary and to pay your bills. You can open a Swedish bank account at most banks in Sweden. And you also have to get a Swedish health insurance, because they are required to have a health insurance in Sweden. And you can get insurance just through the employer, or you can purchase it privately, so nothing difficult there either. But they also want you to learn Swedish, because Swedish is the official language of Sweden. It's not required to know Swedish to live in Sweden, but it will make your life much easier. And you can take Swedish classes at a local adult center or online, so it's not that hard as well. But there was an outcry in Britain after the Swedish Migration Agency announced that it would be issuing leave orders to British citizens who had not applied for post-Brexit resident status by the deadline. Some British citizens argued that the Swedish government was being unfair to British citizens who had been living in Sweden for many years and who had made a contribution to Swedish society. They also argued that the Swedish government was not taking into account the fact that many British citizens had not been able to apply for post-Brexit resident status because they were unable to afford the application fee. Seriously? The Swedish government defended its decision, saying that it was simply enforcing the law. And the government also said that it was providing assistance to British citizens who were being affected by the leave orders, such as helping them to find housing and employment in the UK. The outcry in Britain over the Swedish leave orders highlights the challenges that people are facing in the wake of Brexit. Many British citizens were uncertain about their future in the EU, and they were facing a number of practical challenges, such as finding a new job or applying for a new visa, or being in trouble if they haven't followed the law before Brexit. The Swedish government is not the only EU government that has issued leave orders to British citizens. Other EU governments, such as France and Germany, have also taken steps to enforce the new rules on British citizens living in the EU after Brexit. It is likely that the outcry in Britain over the Swedish leave orders will come up from time to time, because British citizens became more aware that the challenges they're facing in the wake of Brexit are quite some challenges. And the British government had said that it's working to negotiate a deal with the EU that will allow British citizens to continue to live and work in the EU after Brexit, but that is the TCA, and we know how that looks. And that needed them to follow the rules before Brexit. And in the meantime, British citizens who are living in the EU should really check if they are following everything, because if there are definitely still people living in Spain, for example, that I talked about in the last video, that might be living in Spain without registering before Brexit and still not registering, they are now illegal immigrants. But everyone who's unsure about this, living in a EU country not having a permanent residence status or something like that, they should contact the migration offices. But seriously, if they haven't followed the rules pre-Brexit, they cannot stay after Brexit, and it's that easy. And I talked about this in several videos already. There are requirements. In Germany, for example, I was told you, when you move to another city or move to Germany, you have to register here with the local authorities. And if you're an EU citizen, where you are free to work, live, and move within the EU, you still have to register with a municipality here if you move here. And that is the point. And the same applies to many other EU countries. And if you didn't do that, I can tell you, I forgot it once to do it immediately. I already paid a fine because I did it 4 weeks after my moving and not 2 weeks after, or within 2 weeks. And so that applies to everyone. And if you don't like that a country is registering their residents, don't move to that country. It's that easy. Because a lot of countries do that, and only because Britain is not doing that. I mean, when I moved to Britain at the time, I of course had to do a lot of the things I said about Sweden today. I had to get a British bank account. I had to get a social security number to work, etc. So only that because there's no overall registration and ID cards like here in Germany, it doesn't mean that there are no regulations. But nevertheless, those registering laws exist in many countries, and if you don't follow that, you are an illegal immigrant. It's that easy. But some people feel special and don't want to believe it still. But nevertheless, if you want to see something more about Brexit or UK politics, the next video is here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.